Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first live stream of 2025. We had a bit of a break over the festive period, but now we're back. And we've got a great session to start us off this year, particularly because it's a topic that I know absolutely nothing about. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot. So we've got Adri Szaplak joining us all the way from Malaysia, which is why it's nice and well lit with her, and I'm here in the dark. So Adri, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
So before we get into the topic of EAL, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I have a background in TEFL. I was an ESL teacher for a long time before I transitioned into EAL. Um, I am originally from Hungary, so that's where I got Delta and Delta qualified. I also have a master's in cognitive linguistics, and I had a very interesting job that originally brought me to Malaysia about 10 years ago. Um, I worked on a project where the British Council ran a project with the Ministry of Education, and they were looking for trainers who would do methodology training and also language training for local English teachers. So that's how I ended up coming here. It was a really interesting job. Um, Very humbling in lots of ways. Um, and I it was incredible working with these really overworked, underappreciated teachers who were doing their best under really difficult circumstances, and then being told that, oh, now because your skills aren't up to par, now you have to go through this training, and doing their best to get the most out of whatever we could provide. But that was a 6 months contract that brought me to Malaysia 10 years ago. I met my husband after I arrived here. So I came here for work and then we met, and now we have two children. So I still live here. Um, I After that contract ended, I found a job with the teaching center at the British Council. So I worked there for another 6 years in various middle management positions. And it was again learned a lot. And Malaysia is a great place for ESL teachers because it is a multilingual, multicultural country to start with. And when I first came here, we had lots and lots of nationalities coming specifically to study English. Since then, the immigration regulations changed, so it's more difficult for students to come in on student visas. But it was a great place to be an EFL teacher. And I then when I had children, I realized that they will have to go to school at some point, and wouldn't it be nice if I could get a place in an international school and then my children could go there? Um, Being a multicultural family, my husband is a Chinese speaker, um, and obviously I'm not. So the option of sending my children to a Chinese school where I couldn't talk to their teachers and not being able to get involved in their education sort of scared me. Um, so I applied for the PGC and then started looking for jobs in the international education sector. And I got my first job as an EAR teacher in 2020, January 2020. And as you can imagine, it was a great start to the year until COVID came. And then suddenly I was new to the job. I was newly promoted to being head of EAL and then teaching exclusively online high school students who didn't speak a word of English, but had to get ready for Key Stage 4. And so like my EFL background, super helpful, and I was incredibly grateful that I could leverage that. And it certainly helped my students. My skill set was useful for my students, but it wasn't enough because there is learning a language, and then there is learning a language at the same time as learning subjects through that language. Um, and so that's where my passion for multilingual education sort of got reignited. I was an EAL learner once in Hungary. Nobody called it that at the time, but I was. And I was, oh yeah, I remember how hard this was. And just trying to revisit what helped me, what I found useful, and what of those things could I leverage to help my students.
Mhm, mhm. So I mean, this is where we kind of get into what is EAL, because I guess for you, it's been in a school, in an international school with which is following a British curriculum. Well, is
Yes.
it it's an English language school then, I'm guessing.
Yes, so we are an English as a medium of education school. Most international schools, actually, most private and international schools in Malaysia are English as a medium of education schools. Um, and EAL is English as an additional language. There isn't um, there is a bit of an inconsistency in who gets designated as an EAL learner, depending on where you are in the world. Um, in the UK, I I believe even now, if you speak a home language that's different from English, then you are designated as an EAL learner, whether you need additional support for English or not. Whereas here, my daughter is in year 2 in our school. She's not an EAL learner. She's never been designated as an EAL learner in any of her schools, even though her two home languages are Hungarian and Cantonese. Uh, but for all intents and purposes, English is her first language because that's what my husband and I speak to each other. That's the language that she has ever experienced in school. So she's a multilingual learner, but she isn't an EAL learner in our context. For
Mhm,
us, an EAL learner is someone who comes in with um, a low CFR level that doesn't allow them, that means that they don't get to access the curriculum without additional language support.
mhm,
And whether they are multilinguals or not doesn't really make a difference because all of our learners are. So it is this is our context here in Malaysia. Southeast Asia tends to designate EAL like this, but I know that in different parts of the world, it can be different.
mhm, mhm. I mean, you mentioned a really nice idea there about like their access to the curriculum. And I mean, that's the tagline for the book, isn't it? Strategies
Yes.
for
Yeah.
inclusion. Yeah. Awesome. Um, so we're kind of talking about there curriculum English, like science and maths, and more than just supporting students to learn the language to kind of talk to their friends.
Yes. Um, it, it's it's almost like when you're planning your lesson, you would have, and you should have, two objectives. A content objective like science, we're learning about states of matter, language objective, and then you would like, I don't know, using the passive to summarize an experiment, for instance. Because for these learners, they might be able to do it in their home language really well, but as we know, skills don't automatically transfer between languages. It needs to be explicitly taught. And like if you think about how a school works and the timetable and the load of that timetable for especially teenagers, high school students, they spend 45 minutes to maybe 90 minutes in a subject and then they move to a different subject. Um, yes, it's all in English, but the language of science, the language of humanities, the language of IT, it's all different. The disciplinary literacy needs to be explicitly taught. These students need to be familiar with how you read, how you write, in the different subject areas. Now, the problem is that this isn't taught at teacher training colleges. So science teachers don't get trained in how you teach the language of science because they just, it's assumed that your students will know how to do that or that it's normal part of your first language development that you pick up formal language. Nobody prepares a teacher for, well, here is a year 9 student who is at A1 CFR level, and good luck in science, good luck in math. And how do we support them? How do we make the curriculum more accessible for them? And it's hard, and it can only be done if we all work together, and that includes all stakeholders. Hopefully, there is an EAL department with trained and skilled teachers who can support the subject teachers. Hopefully, there is enough time for that collaboration. Hopefully, the parents are on board. Hopefully, the student has had um, access to good quality education in their home language that they can leverage. So what we don't have here, but the UK has to deal with a lot, is refugee students where that might not be the case. And then there is a whole different aspect to how do you make the curriculum accessible to students who might actually be behind because they haven't had, an uninterrupted time in education.
Yeah, yeah, so many challenges. And so let's think about your context, because like you say, it could be so different in so many different places. So in your context, for your EAL learners, are they receiving extra support within the classes, or is this happening as like extra support at other moments of the school day?
We're aiming for a hybrid model, but currently we're tending towards withdrawal sessions um, because of logistical reasons, and this is something that the senior leadership team is working on improving. Um, I work in the elementary school. I'm head of EAL in the elementary school, and Peter is the head of EAL in the high school. So we are currently working in the same school, which is lovely. Um, and our provisions are different. So in the elementary school, we have Mandarin lessons for every elementary school learner every day for 45 minutes. So that's our EAL time because for the majority of our EAL learners, this is their first language. So we know that they are already fluent in that language. Taking them out of this subject for a little while until the English gets better is not detrimental. For the other group of learners, this is a new language that they'd be learning. And while there are, you know, um, indicators that suggest that actually, allowing an EAL learner to start in a new language is good because they will experience success. Because EAL learners tend to be successful language learners. It levels the playing field. They'd be together with native English speakers and going through the same difficulties. But in this school, we prioritize this time because we're delaying them joining Mandarin. So it's not that they will never get to, but we prioritize this time so that their English can get better first. So this is guaranteed. Every child between year 1 and year 6 will see their EAL teacher for a withdrawal session once a day for 45 minutes. In these lessons, depending on the level of the learners, or the group that you're teaching, um, the there is always focus on content, like curriculum content and language, but the weighting of it shifts depending on how fluent the learners are. Obviously, the more fluent they are, the more we can focus on content. The less fluent they are, the more we have to focus on developing their basic interpersonal communication skills first. Um, on top of this, we might withdraw them from other lessons for shorter periods of time for targeted interventions. We sometimes see them in the mornings in small groups or individual targeted interventions to work on specific things. We also run an after school program where we only see our A1, A2 level learners twice a week. And these are more like EFL lessons, really.
Mhm.
Less connection to the curriculum and just making sure that their basic English develops as fast as possible. We try to ensure that the EAL teachers are part of the planning groups for the different subject areas so that we are aware of what the students have to learn, but also that we get to input strategies or even suggested activities for the teachers to do in class. And we run a we call it academic language program, which is the student EAL learners get this as home learning. So once a week they get a set of words that either comes from maths or IPC or English, science, and they take it home, and the families get involved. So they look at these terms. They are tier three, very subject specific terms. They look at it, they talk about what that is in the home language, and then they look for visuals if that's appropriate, look for examples, and then they write if they are old enough to be able to write, then they write sentences, definitions, examples, and they bring the sheets back at the end of the week. So this is what we do in the elementary school. And in the high school, um, in Key Stage 3, the learners either go to EAL or they go to mainstream English lessons. And then when the EAL learners are ready, they will join the mainstream class. And then Key Stage 4, they either do second language GCSE or first language GCSE.
Okay, awesome. I love that idea that you mentioned just at the end of the elementary section with the learners taking the language home and kind of introducing the parents to it, and but also that contrastive analysis, what is it in my language? Does it look similar or different? That's really
Yeah.
great. Hmm.
The high school has an academic language program as well. Obviously, it's much more detailed. But the concept is the same, that the students will be taking it home and engaging with it in their home language, but relating it to English. Because the idea is that the students have likely learned all of these concepts already or have some understanding of it. So it's activating schemata, but we don't necessarily always have the time to do that in the lessons. And this is a way in which the EAL department is trying to help our subject teacher friends who will certainly, struggle for time in the lesson,
Hmm. Hmm.
going through key phrases every time. Because how many times do you have to see a word before you actually remember? And these we are talking about like Latin origin words, which aren't easy even for first language speakers.
Yep, yeah, no, it's definitely true. And I mean, it's something when you were talking earlier about like learning the language of the subject. I think I mean, I'm based in Spain and there's a lot of language which has those Latin roots. So when there've been bilingual programs in schools, they've often done the science and the maths programs because there was a lot of crossover. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
tricky when it looks nothing like you're
Yeah.
used to.
So the majority of our students here, they are either Mandarin speakers or Korean speakers or Japanese speakers. So the script of the language is completely different. I have a year one group this term, and it's a very humbling experience because neither are they ready really to hold a pencil, um, or they aren't able to read and write in their home language yet.
Mhm.
So they might speak it, they might understand it when it's spoken, but they can't leverage it the same way as our older students can. So that it's a whole different skill set that I'm developing at the moment, and I'm really
Mhm.
relying on our key stage one specialist here and hitting her up every day about, oh, what did I do now? Because so far I've mostly been working in high school or upper key stage two, so it is really interesting to work with the little one. On the other hand, there is less need to withdraw these little learners from other subject areas because everyone is still developing their language. Everyone is still working on handwriting. Everyone is still working on phonics. And actually, phonics is really helpful. It's not, uh, you know, be all end all, but key stage one learners tend to develop their English faster because like the whole entire school system is set up in a way it's geared towards language development.
Mhm.
Whereas year three and up, it's expected that you can read and write at a certain level. So learners who come in year three and above and aren't familiar with the script or aren't able to read and write independently yet, they find it a lot more challenging to catch up because the gap is suddenly so much wider.
Mhm. Wow, yeah. And going back to what you were saying, obviously you're working with in elementary school, which
Yeah.
covers a huge range of years, and then high school as well, you've got quite a range of years. I, thinking about the sort of topics that people learn, particularly when they get to high school, do EAL teachers need to have quite a wide subject knowledge bank, like, to be able to explain science and maths at higher levels?
I mean, I think it's great if you do. I certainly didn't have that when I first started out. Um, um, if if you're lucky enough, then you learn on the job, and this is certainly something that I myself have been learning on the job because um, I never did quite that well in maths or science when I was in high school. Um, and so when I was supporting high school students in key stage for 10, like year 10 students in a maths lesson, and I had this aha moment, like, oh, so that's what it's like. I never done that when I was a teenager, but now I understand. Um, but no, I don't think this should hold anybody back because you have your subject specialists, so you rely on them. They will deliver the content. Your job is to make the language more accessible. So thinking about it's a bit like um, planning backwards. Like you know what the student will be expected to be able to do in that subject or in that unit, really. And then thinking backwards and like, okay, well, what skills, what language specific skills do they need? And what specific functional language, for instance, or subject specific language do they need? Which of these are they likely to pick up in the lessons, and which of these do we have to um, supplement? Um, Pre-teaching is, it's the bread and butter of ESL teaching, uh, and it's such a useful strategy that subject teachers can easily do. Somebody
Mhm.
needs to tell them this is what you have to do because, it's like I've always been like this. Once I see something, once I try something, I'll know how to do it and then I'll do it and it becomes part of my practice. But if nobody has ever tells you that, hey, if you just like, introduce the words first and make sure that everybody understands them, give them 3 minutes to quickly translate with an iPad, you have a much better chance of making sure that they'll understand what the lesson will be about. Um, and it's not minimizing. Like this is a huge undertaking for everyone included. The subject teachers are doing the best they can, um, and the EAL teachers are doing the best they can. And there might still be students who are really, really struggling. But there are some quick fixes, some easier strategies that we are suggesting in the book for subject teachers to try, because it might actually make a meaningful impact for them and also the students in the classes.
Mhm.
And yeah, pre-teaching is one of those.
Awesome. Well, I mean, let's chat a little bit more about the book then. I was going to ask you, what are some of your favorite strategies from the book? So
Oh,
pre-teaching.
yeah, no, pre-teaching definitely. Um, we have chapters in there about pre and post listening tasks, which is something that I've been revisiting lately because there is with um, this is the era of AI and multimodal education. Our school is really well equipped. We have basically giant iPads on the wall instead of whiteboards now, and it's wonderful. And so the teachers and the students have access to lots out there, and it's it catches students' attention when you put videos on, and videos are a great way of engaging students and explaining things. Um, but for an EAL learner, um, it's noise unless they know why. And again, as a second language teacher, we all know we have to prepare our learners for a listening task. And subject teachers aren't trained the same way as we are. They have other things to worry about that I never think about. Um, but just making them aware that activate things come out before a video is played, or giving the student a reason to listen will make a world of a difference. Um, Putting subtitles on, obviously, giving them a chance to respond to that video like you do in an ESR class, if there is a chance, like like talking to someone else about, oh, this was the question. Did I get that right? Um, these things have, really positive, even they can have really positive impact on what happens in the classroom. And then we wrote a whole section on the other aspects of inclusion that aren't clear, aren't straightforward in some cases. And it's definitely not something that I thought about when I first became an EAL teacher. But academic inclusion is obviously the big focus of schools. But what about all the other aspects of inclusion? How do you include a learner in a community? You know, it's for some people making friends is hard even if you don't struggle with the language. So how can we encourage people to be inclusive in the languages that they are using? How can we include learners in the school community that might be so foreign to them, not just the language but the customs, the way you address the teacher. um I work with really little learners who, like, they might have come from a school context where they weren't allowed to ever ask to go to the toilet during a lesson.
Mhm.
And just thinking about all of these things, making sure that, those basic needs are met so that they are ready to
Mhm.
actually learn, are again things that I think for a really long time I took for granted,
Mhm.
that my
Yeah.
learners will all come with the same understanding of what a classroom looks like, what a school looks like, what are the expectations. And
Or
it
just
isn't
that
the
they would integrate, they would see how things work and pick it up quite quickly. But
Yeah,
like you say, if they've got that language barrier, yeah.
yes. And that, do they feel valued members of the school community? Do they see, hear their languages being spoken? And when it is it valued? Do teachers react positively to their responses and engagement, regardless of the language they use, whether they use language at all? The silent period is a massive thing. It's again not something that I was aware of it as an ESL teacher, but as an EAL teacher, it is something that is acutely important because and it can be extremely long um, for some learners, and then once it's over, they're suddenly like, oh wow, so you're actually quite fluent. You haven't been
Mhm.
saying two words, and now you're like, high flyer. But while it lasts, it can come across as, is there an SEN need, for instance, or um, what is the child struggling with? Is it anxiety, or and just being aware that this silent period can actually be just a silent period, and it's actually not a
Mhm.
sign of anything else. We just need to make sure that the student gets enough comprehensible input, that they get to process the language and get to learn and get to listen, and give them the time and the space to react and respond to learning, maybe in different ways if they aren't ready to speak yet.
Wow.
Because if we push them too hard too quick, especially when they are young, then we might just prolong that period.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's so important, like taking it beyond just the academic aspect. Because particularly for people, for students in your context who might be coming into this international school and everybody seems to know what's happening and ah, yeah, it can be quite overwhelming. Yeah. And I've got to ask because I know Peter Clements, your co-author, he's famously known as Peter Pun. Can we expect any puns in the book?
A few, yes. All his. I can't take credit for any of them.
Fantastic. And I
I think
mean,
he would probably say sadly not as many as he wished for
I can
or he would
imagine,
have
I can
liked.
imagine. Yeah. And what did you enjoy about the process of writing this book?
Um, well, first of all, collaborating with Pete has been incredible. He's a much more accomplished writer than I am, and I will forever be grateful for him for taking on this project with me. We share this passion for supporting multilingual learners and supporting our colleagues to be better equipped to help them. Um, and so, you know. like I knew nothing about writing a book, publishing, what that takes. So everything for me was learning for the first time. So on the one hand, it was like, I was trying to take everything on. On the other hand, I had this incredible person to rely on and ask questions from, and he's been great at, you know, he never made me feel like I asked stupid questions. He might have thought it, but he never so it never made me feel like I did. So there was a lot of trust in this process, which I really appreciate. Um, Collaborating on writing these strategies to support other teachers, um, it, it was an incredible experience but first of all to realize we thought that there is a need for this. So we started collaborating before the publisher showed interest. And obviously we're grateful to Delta because this way, we have a wider reach. But we knew that there was a need, but when Delta showed interest, it sort of proved to us that we're right about this. There is a need, and people do need support with this. So going through that process of what we saw in the classes that we were lucky enough to be supporting in, and the conversations that we were having with our colleagues, and then going through that thought process of what of this will be useful for other teachers. Um, and as you can imagine, we could have written like 500 pages. So then that paring that down to a book that that people aren't too afraid to pick up, and then putting it in um, words that will be straightforward enough for people to read and say, okay, I'll try this. Um, so that was all really, it was incredible.
Mhm. Fantastic. Awesome. And so the book is kind of aimed at EAL teachers, but do you feel that it's also, I mean, you've mentioned it's strategies as well for the curriculum teachers. Do you think as
Yeah,
well for people who are working in bilingual education, it could also be a
absolutely.
useful resource?
Absolutely. We actually aimed it at teachers in general. So in fact, we wrote it with subject teachers in mind first, and of course, EAR colleagues. Anyone in bilingual education for sure. Anyone working with refugees will hopefully find some of these strategies useful. Um, we hope that senior leaders in schools also read parts of it because some of it is you have to have policies in place in schools like mine to be able to do the work that we do.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, interesting. And I had another question. Oh, so going back to being an EAL teacher, just in case there are people who are listening who are thinking of going down that route in the future, what does it take to transition into that sort of role?
Courage. It's there is no specific qualification to date, at least not that I'm aware of, that prepares you to be an EAL teacher. There are different routes. We're currently going through hiring here, so if anyone is interested, um, and I see lots of CVs at the moment. So there are obviously people like myself and Pete who have a background in ESL, TEFL, and then transition into an international school. In my case, it was the requirement for me was that I had to get a PGCE because in Malaysia I couldn't have the job that I currently have without that qualification. But it depends what part of the world you're in, I guess. Um, and I learned a lot of the curriculum specific aspect of the job on the job. And I've had incredible people who were supporting me with this. And as I mentioned at the beginning, shortly after I actually became an EL teacher, COVID came. So I worked a lot in isolation, which was hard in lots of ways, but we all were working in isolation. So, I wasn't the only one. But suddenly the world opened up and there was so much shared online and talking to people, taking online courses with the Bell Foundation. I met people online who shared their experience, and talking to other people made me feel less isolated and realized that there is actually a lot out there that is EAR specific. Um, and now a lot of it is more widely available. So the Bell Foundation is one of those um, organizations that puts on lots of free webinars, which is, I often recommend it to our colleagues who, don't necessarily want to go through a whole course, but maybe just get a bit more familiar with what EAL is. There are obviously courses that you can take. There are other providers as well. There are different EAL specific assessments that are available. Rita being one of them, they also run different training sessions and webinars. Um, and there are more and more people blogging about this journey. So learning from each other, I think, is one of the best ways to do it. And then the other sort of route into EAL that I see now is class teachers who don't have a background in language teaching, but have been experiencing more and more multilingual learners in their classes or have an interest and a passion for working with multilingual learners. So they consciously look for ways in which they want to learn a little bit more about that and try and get into EAL teaching positions. Lots of people become EAL teachers because they have to, in terms of like they already work in a school
Hmm.
and the school has an influx of multilingual learners coming in, and then they need somebody in that position. So these people might apply for these positions, but in my experience, they often are at like, oh, you're head of English, you might as well do this, and suddenly they find themselves in a position where they have to find out about how to do this. And I think, even in 2020, when I started, it was a lot more difficult to find information online about this. Now the world is your oyster, and there are lots of people out there. Honestly, so many people who are willing to share what they know, what they've learned
Yeah,
um, with others. So yeah, LinkedIn is a great place to meet people. That's how I met people.
fantastic. Awesome. Um, well, sorry, it's frog in my throat this morning. Just one final question before we finish. Like, what do you enjoy about being an EAL teacher?
Great question. Where do I start? Um, I I just really like teaching. I really enjoyed being an ESL teacher as well. Um, what I what I enjoy more about my current role is that it is in an actual school. I find schools fascinating places. I'm quite a nerd. I grew up in a school. I spent my summer holidays in the school because my mom worked in the finance office and I liked it. So for me to work in a school and being able to build these relationships with my students, I was used to seeing my students once or twice a week, and that was lovely. Um, but the course and they might or might not come back. They might not end up in my class. Here, I actually get to know these learners, and I see them day in, day out, and it's a very different experience. And I personally really enjoy that. EAL has a massive role in pastoral care in these schools because you know we're the teachers that these students see every day, sometimes and in smaller groups, so they get more of a chance. We hear their voices more, we check in with them, and so we really get to see them as
Oh,
people, and that's lovely. So that is something that I really enjoy. Um, I actually really enjoy this cross-curricular element of EAL. When I worked as a high school EAL teacher and got to support lots in the different subject areas, I actually looked forward to going to those lessons for selfish reasons as well, because I just really enjoyed being in suddenly I was learning science. Um, and it's a very exciting learning curve for me yeah, and it's challenging, and it's challenging me in good ways. And every day is a new challenge because in ESL, yeah, of course, using your own materials, adapting what you have, you teach the students you have, it's never the same. Um, but EAL is like that on steroids because um, your cohort changes all the time. We have rolling enrollment, so we have students joining any given week, and the one student who comes in might change the dynamic of the whole entire class. And so we're never able to, recycle any planning from the previous year because our cohorts are completely different. And the goalpost is constantly moving, and we're just trying our best to catch up. So it is really exciting. And I feel like my skill set has been stretched and challenged in more ways than I could ever imagine. Um, I don't know though if I'll forever be able to do this because it's full on. Every day is a new challenge. Um, and I wonder if there will be a time when I feel like I'm completely burnt out because I haven't had a chance to, you know.
Mhm.
So that is something that I sometimes think about, like how long can I keep this up? Um, I'm really I'm really lucky because I work with a great group of teachers here in the elementary school who share this passion, and I've never had problems with motivating them. We plan like our planning load is incredible because we make everything from scratch because we have to work from whatever the students are learning in their mainstream classes. And I never hear them complain. So I'm really lucky.
Awesome. Oh, I mean, your passion for it, I mean, it just comes through, which is just so wonderful to hear. And like you say, seeing those students for longer periods, getting to see them
Mm.
as people and as they grow and develop as well, that's so wonderful.
Yeah, I do feel that passion.
Mhm. Fantastic. Well, Adri, thank you so much for coming along this morning for me, this afternoon for you, and sharing some tips. There's loads more tips in the book. It's filled with strategies for inclusion. So definitely pick up a copy. I'll share a link to it in the book, in the notes. Um, Adri, enjoy your weekend and
Thank you.
because it's
Thank you so
Chinese
much.
New Year.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to talk to you. And yes, happy Chinese New Year to those who celebrate.
Fantastic. Have a good week, everyone.